Almighty, ever-living God, we thank you for giving us this opportunity to be here this afternoon for open discussion and consultation on this highly debatable and emotionally charged topic, whether marijuana can help or hurt individuals. Father, we implore your wisdom, your guidance, your blessing for our government for having taken a proactive approach towards the discussion of this issue, allowing for an open consultation on the future of marijuana in Dominica. Father, we pray for your blessing on the Minister of Justice, Immigration and National Security, the Minister of Health and the Social Services, and all who work in these ministries. We pray particularly for those given the specific charge of this highly debatable issue. We ask, dear Father, that you graciously grant them wisdom to govern amid the conflicting interests and issues regarding the topic at hand. Grant them the confidence in promoting what is good and fitting and what will serve the best interest, the true needs and welfare of your people, keeping in mind the instructions of St. Paul to us in his letter to the Thessalonians, chapter 5, verse 21, it tells us, test all things and hold fast to what is good. We pray, Father, that all leaders and all concerned will have a keen thirst for justice, for rightness, and the ability to work together in harmony even when there is honest disagreement. We pray that all the presenters on the topic here this afternoon will approach the subject with truth, honesty, clarity, that they will provide scientifically proven information for or against, so that all present, all listening to this discussion will be well informed and enlightened, not be misinformed or misguided. We pray that all concerned will have the courage and conviction in voicing their concerns in a way that will help move the discussion forward so that there will be wise judgment and the correct decisions taken. We pray for the agenda set before us here this afternoon, that it will be followed to the end, giving the assurance of what pleases the Lord and what will benefit especially our youth, and create a proper atmosphere that will enable all concerned to work together in harmony, even when there is honest disagreement. In the name of Jesus, we pray.
Honorable Roosevelt Scarrett, Prime Minister of Dominica, Honorable Reginald Austri, Deputy Prime Minister, Your Lordship, the Most Reverend Gabriel Mazeb, Bishop of Rosal, Honorable Raymond Blackman, Minister for Justice, Immigration and National Security, Honorable Dr. Kenneth Darrow, Minister of Health and Social Services, other honorable members of Cabinet, Honorable Lennox Linton, Leader of the Parliamentary Opposition, other honorable members of Parliament, Your Worship, Mayor Aaron John and Mr. John, His Excellency Steve Farrell, Ambassador and Secretary of the Cabinet, Ms. Joanne Commodore, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Justice, Immigration and National Security, Ms. Letita Lestrade-White, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Health and Social Services, other Permanent Secretary, Professor Rosemary Bell Antoine, Dean of Law, University of West Indies, Father Charles Martin, distinguished guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the coordinator of the program today, and the rules are very simple. We'll try to make it user-friendly. I will give an introduction later on, and the keynote speaker will address you, and the rest of the meeting will be for the contributions and questions from the general public. But at this point, before we go on, the Honorable Prime Minister is here. He's been traveling, and He wants to address you because he has other commitments, so I will ask him to come here. Thank you, and I'll be back.
Thank you very much. Let me recognize my colleagues and Professor Antoine, and to thank her for, for being here today to assist us in advancing the national consultation. I am really sorry, but I won't be able to stay with you during the course of this consultation, as I have to travel to one of the villages to visit a family of a very good friend of mine who passed away this morning, suddenly. So I need to go to help console the community and the family there. But the government has articulated its views on this subject matter, both in the budget address in 2018 and also in the Independence Day address of 2018. And we have placed in context the approach which we would like to take as a country in advancing ourselves on the issue of marijuana and its potential uses. So this is the first opportunity where, as citizens of our country and stakeholders, we can start the process of having a wholesome dialogue and conversation. It's not an argument, it's a conversation we should be having on this matter. Obviously, all of us do not agree on every subject matter on this issue, but that is all part of the dialogue and the conversation which we should have and need to have, so that we can come to certain conclusions as a nation on how do we approach the issue of marijuana and its various uses. But the fact is, we cannot be unmindful that the world's attitude towards marijuana has changed and is changing. And there are many who have been advocating for those changes for a very long time. And I think that the time has come for there to be an enlightened conversation on the issue, on religious purposes, on medicinal purposes. But at the same token, too, I believe we must not be unmindful of the challenges which the movement towards allowing these things to become a reality will also pose, especially to young people who we do not want to expose in any unreasonable or irresponsible manner to the misuse and overuse of the herb and so forth. So there is a continuum of views, not only here in Dominica, but regionally and also internationally. But I am satisfied that we can find consensus on some things that we can deal with almost immediately, while we continue dialogue on other things which we need a greater level of understanding, appreciation, and consciousness. I believe fundamentally and ideologically that we should not allow the prosecution of individuals for small quantities and having that on the record for their lifetime. I believe that these are things that we can deal with almost immediately as a nation towards the changing of the legislation in respect to that. The issue of those who are recognized Rastafarians and who use the herb as part of their ritual and religious processes, I believe that we can find consensus on these things to allow for the Rastafarian movement to properly and legally, without any fear of persecution or prosecution, to be able to have access to this substance, to this herb in a responsible manner, without any fear of prosecution. So I think there are some things that we can find consensus on very, very easily, and we can move on. But there'll be other things I believe that will need some more time for more consultation, more conversation, because with one action that we will take, there'll be attendant issues which we have to address to allow it to function and to operate in a manner that is acceptable not to all, but to the majority. So I think it is not a situation where the government is seeking to impose its likes or its dislikes on the society in respect to this matter. I believe once we get a sense that there is consensus, there's an appreciation for the issues, the government has the political will to take these matters to Parliament and to effect the necessary legislation to allow for these things to become operationalized. I really wish I could stay with you throughout the consultation, but I'm leaving you in even more capable hands in the person of the Deputy Prime Minister, Honorable Reginald Ostry, who will sit in for me during the entire course of this consultation. And I look forward to receiving the results of this consultation. I give you the assurance that every view expressed here today will be recorded and will be analyzed, and a report will come out of that, of those discussions, so that it can serve as a basis and a foundation for future consultations. Because what I want to caution us against is for there to be, for us to be going in circles discussing this matter. You know, which is usually a temptation of human beings to not want to resolve an issue, but to continue talking about it infinitum. So I believe once we can agree on a couple of issues, let's deal with it decisively, and let's move on to the next subject matter or item on the agenda, so that we can come full circle at some point in life. Maybe not in our generation, but certainly we would have laid the foundation for future generations and so forth. So I'm hoping that we can have this enlightened discussion, and I think we as a country, we as a world, we as a region, we have come a long way when we can now openly discuss the issue of the decriminalization of marijuana and the many uses which many people have advocated for so long in the wilderness, talking about it. And I'm happy that we have been able to have the discussion. And what better time you can have this consultation at age 40? So age 40 that we have in this consultation. But I really want to thank all of you for being here, and thank the organizers and all of you here, and of course, especially Professor Antoine, who chaired the CARICOM commission on this, and I have read most of the 132-page document. I will read the rest in some point, but I have tried to capture the salient issues and recommendations, and some of which we are fully in agreement with, and of course some of which would need more discussion and consultation at the regional level. But I think we all need to read this document. I believe we have placed it on the government website, so you can have it downloaded, because to print 142 pages for all of you here, it would cost money, and we need money for not spending money. But you can get a soft copy, and you can read in your own time. But it's a 142-page document that all of us should read, because that will also help. This is why we invited Professor Antoine here to facilitate the discussion, because it will save us some time in terms of not having a prolonged discussion on issues that we can really agree on very speedily and very quickly. I am very sorry to the ministers, the two ministers who have been leading the charge, Dr. Daru and Honorable Blackmore, for disrupting the program. But I hope you understand the reason why I had to disrupt the program. God bless you, and thank you very much.
That's a copy of the report being given to the Prime Minister. Okay, come on. Before I introduce Ms. Commodore, I just want to run over the process once again, and I want to welcome each of you here today. This event is an indication of our country's democracy. I believe that when Aristotle conceptualized democracy, he felt that people should come together in the square, discuss issues before they are legislated. Of course, that was 3,000 years ago, but this is democracy. So this, on behalf of the government, is certainly a step in the right direction where consensus can be reached through consultation. And I'm glad that he has chosen the college to manage and work with you on this. The process that I say is very simple. I will make a brief presentation on the topic. Professor Antoine will make the presentation on the CARICOM report, and then the floor is all yours. So to avoid any further delay, I'd like to call Joanne Commodore, Permanent Secretary and Minister of Justice, Immigration and National Security, to welcome you.
Honorable Reginald Austri, Deputy Prime Minister, Your Lordship, the Most Reverend Gabriel Maze, Bishop of Roseau, Honorable Rayburn Blackmore, Minister for Justice, Immigration and National Security, Honorable Dr. Kenneth Daru, Minister of Health and Social Services, other honorable members of Cabinet, Honorable Lennox Linton, Leader of the Parliamentary Opposition, other honorable members of Parliament, Your Worship, Mayor Irene John and Mr. John, His Excellency Steve Farrell, Ambassador and Secretary to the Cabinet, Mrs. Letitia Lestrade-Wyke, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Health and Social Services, other permanent secretaries, Professor Rosemary Bell Antoine, Dean of Law, University of the West Indies, President of the Dominica State College and National Coordinator for the Consultation on Cannabis, Dr. Donald Peters, Father Charles Martin, distinguished guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. The 16th of November marks what I hope will be a historic day in the Commonwealth of Dominica. I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming you to the first national consultation on cannabis in the Commonwealth of Dominica. In his address to the nation on Independence Day, the Honorable Prime Minister indicated that Dominica is now 40 and mature, and that now is the time in our nation's history to have mature discussions. Very few topics generate as much interest as the topic of cannabis. This is why there is no better time to have this discussion than now, when we are mature but enlightened, older and wiser but certainly more modern and open-minded. With age comes the expectation that topics such as these are treated with thoroughly and properly. This country is one of a kind, and that is why our approach must similarly be one of a kind. Today, we invite you to not only listen with an open mind, but to contribute where you can. Personally, I am excited that this is the approach that has been taken. To get a sense of the heartbeat of the nation, you must feel its pulse. I will quote the Honorable Prime Minister again. In his Independence Day address, he indicated that these are no longer issues we can mutter under our breaths. Today marks the beginning of no more muttering on the issue of the possible uses of cannabis in the Commonwealth of Dominica. In the interest of time, let me just welcome everyone once again.
Thank you, P.S. Commodore. One of the players in the whole dynamic of cannabis usage in Dominica will be the Health Minister, Honorable Dr. Kenneth Daru. And now I will call him to address you, Dr. Kenneth Daru, Minister for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Honorable Reginald Austri, Deputy Prime Minister, Your Lordship, the Most Reverend Gabriel Maze, Bishop of Roseau, Honorable Rayburn Blackmore, Minister for Justice, Immigration and National Security, other honorable members of Cabinet, Honorable Lennox Linton, Leader of the Parliamentary Opposition, other honorable members of Parliament, Your Worship Mayor Irene John and Mr. John, His Excellency Steve Farrell, Ambassador and Secretary to the Cabinet, Ms. Joanne Commodore, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Justice, Immigration and National Security, Mrs. Letitia Lestrade-Wyke, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Health and Social Services, other Permanent Secretaries, Professor Rosemary Bell Antoine, Dean of the Faculty of Law, University of the West Indies, President of the Dominica State College and National Coordinator for the Consultation on Cannabis, Dr. Donald Peters, and Chairperson of today's event, Father Charles Martin, distinguished invited guests and other guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. I am both pleased and honored to be part of this inaugural national consultation on cannabis, and would like to commend the government of the Commonwealth of Dominica for putting together this much-needed event. Indeed, pleased is an understatement, as many of the issues surrounding this trending, all-important topic is right down the portfolio of the Ministry of Health and Social Services. And as Minister, I welcome this first-of-its-kind consultation, especially at a time when we have just celebrated our 40th anniversary of independence, a coming-of-age milestone, an age which speaks to maturity, and one when serious, sober, and objective deliberations are made, leading to responsible and rational recommendations and decisions. And whilst this consultation is the first all-inclusive multi-stakeholder here in Dominica, this topic has been making the rounds for quite some time now. Indeed, 4 years ago, in March of 2014, at the Heads of CARICOM meeting in St. Vincent, our wise regional leaders mandated the establishment of the Regional Commission on Marijuana, made up of a wide cross-section of professional stakeholders and representatives of various interest groups, to address the issues identified and to put together forward concrete recommendations and clear guidance as to the way forward to the future of this so-called wonder herb. This commission was headed by Professor Rosemary Bell Antoine, Dean of Legal Affairs at the St. Augustine campus of the University of the West Indies. The objective of this commission was, amongst others, to conduct rigorous inquiries into the social, health, and legal issues surrounding cannabis sativa, more commonly referred to, of course, marijuana, ganja, kaya sensimilla, and, of course, many, many other names. Unfortunately, the advent of Hurricane Maria last year impeded the visit of the entire commission to Dominica, but they have since presented their report and recommendations. However, we're privileged to have with us today the chairman of the commission, who gladly conceded to a request to make a presentation here at today's event. Professor, we welcome you to Dominica, the nature island of the world, and we look forward to your presentation and, of course, your esteemed guidance. Ladies and gentlemen, recent research-driven evidence on the medicinal properties and use of marijuana, especially in the treatment of chronic pain management and neurological disorders, cannot, and I repeat, cannot be ignored, and I dare say must be a central part of the ongoing discussions. This, coupled with the historic religious use of the good herb by certain religious and cultural groups of our society, lends strong arguments towards its declassification and even decriminalization. On the flip side, however, one cannot deny the multitude of compelling and overwhelming evidence of psychological and psychiatric disorders intricately linked to the indiscriminate use of marijuana, and the potential social ills that could result in the ad hoc liberation of the plant must be soberly and objectively factored in the discourse. Reiterating the strong arguments posed above, we all can agree that the need for this national discussion on this all-important issue is indeed very, very timely. Ladies and gentlemen, as a democratic country, and again, on the heels of its 40th birthday celebration, we have to understand and ensure that in the pursuit of all for each and each for all, that the views of any one person or group of persons are not sidelined, whilst at the same time, the satisfaction of a select few does not lead to the detriment of the whole. And in doing so, we have to put systems in place to ensure that whilst individual religious and cultural rights are recognized, we protect each and every one of our citizens, especially the most vulnerable, and in this case, our children, who would instinctively go with the flow, resulting in a new uncontrollable wave of health and social ills. Thus, it is the expectation that today's presentations and ensuing conversations and interactions will lay the platform for mature, practical, and responsible recommendations, void of any sense of extremism, emotionalism, and sensationalism. Recommendations which will factor in the realities of a small island developing state like ours, with still developing health, legal, and social systems. Ladies and gentlemen, friends all, in closing, please permit me to share a quote from two separate songs by two Jamaican reggae superstars, Beenie Man and Tony Rebel. And I quote, "Since he was found upon King Solomon's grave, if he burned since Emilia, me could never be freed." And whilst the authenticity of this statement is debatable, I sincerely hope that the spirit of King Solomon, who incidentally happens to be the wisest man that ever lived, will descend on the discussions here today, and of course on future discussions, thus guiding the proceedings towards a wise and spiritually favored output. I thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Dr. Daru. You may need Solomon to come to help you. Well, as you know, cannabis use in Dominica is still illegal, and that falls under the purview of the Minister of Justice, Immigration and National Security. So I will now ask him to come and address you. Minister Blackmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Peters. Honorable Reginald Ostry, Deputy Prime Minister, Your Lordship, Reverend Gabriel Mazier, Bishop of Roseau, Honorable Dr. Kenneth Daru, Minister for Health and Social Services, other ministers, Honorable Lennox Linton, Leader of the Opposition, other members of Parliament, Your Worship, Mayor of Roseau, His Excellency, Sir Farrell, Ambassador and Secretary to the Cabinet, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Justice, Immigration and National Security, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Health and Social Services, other Permanent Secretaries, Professor Rosemary Bell Antoine, Dean of the University of the West Indies, President of the Dominica State College, Dr. Donald Peters, who is also a moderator for this event today, Father Charles Martin, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, friends all, listeners via the radio in Dominica, and those of you overseas listening via the internet. I intend to be very, very, very brief here today. The Commonwealth of Dominica has finally attained the age of 40. And this 40 years has not been attained without struggles, heartbreak, having to pick ourselves up, but also with moments of great enlightenment, growth, and endurance of spirit. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time that in this spirit, ladies and gentlemen, the theme for this year's budget address from Honorable Prime Minister was selected from survival to sustainability and success, a resilient Dominica. It's in this spirit that we're here today on this consultation on the uses of marijuana in the Commonwealth of Dominica. In his 2018 address, budget address that is, the Honorable Prime Minister indicated that at the recent heads of government meetings in Jamaica, a report by the CARICOM Regional Commission on Marijuana was presented. This commission highlighted a number of recommendations in respect to our approach to marijuana. We want to assure Dominicans, therefore, that we are not asleep and we do not intend to remain asleep on this very important issue. Maturity dictates that it is time to have a mature discussion about marijuana. In his Independence Day address to the nation, the Honorable Prime Minister stated that Dominica should discuss this idea with a measure of maturity and arrive at a position that is in the best interest of this beautiful country. The time has come to get the populace involved in this very important discussion. The issue of whether we allow the use of medical or recreational marijuana has been and continues to be a burning topic. One of the greatest interests is the medical value of marijuana and how Dominica can maximize and draw on this fully. Ladies and gentlemen, what is the role of Dominica at this time in relation to marijuana? And more importantly, what is Dominica's place in the change that is sweeping this globe? There have been years of research on marijuana. What is the status and quality of that research? More importantly, what is the truth about marijuana? We need, as a nation, to orient our minds as adults on the following. 1, how can the use of marijuana help us? And secondly, but very important, and how can it hurt us? It would be remiss of us not to have these issues fully explored and spoken of. But these discussions will also help us to develop a template as to which direction we should take as a mature and emerging people. The status of marijuana legally must also be reviewed. But however, before we depart too quickly from our current position, it must be considered what we may or may not have to put in place to support a society where the legal status of marijuana may be changed. This is why we have sought information and research from a wide variety of groups and persons worldwide and in the region. We must, as a mature people, remember that while the uses of marijuana is being legalized in many first world countries, we must never forget that our realities do not mirror the realities of first world countries in many respects. It is therefore imperative that we create a path that is tailor-made to our unique needs, to the unique needs of Dominica, and let us not make loud statements about the total legalization of marijuana, which is largely platitudes. Let us be objective, value-free in our approach as a mature and developing people. At the end, my dear friends, we hope to take a look as to where we are legally, socially, economically, in regards to the use of marijuana, and where we seek to go as a mature and civilized people. I want at this point to welcome Dr. Antoine to the most beautiful country on earth. And I know, as a professor in the field of law, it calls for a lot of concentration and logic. So therefore, we have the remedy for you to make it easier for your brain to process all those hard cases and facts. And I invite you to take a drive to the valley and to have a bath in one of our natural hot springs. And that will do you very, very well. I wish you well, and may the good Lord bless this beautiful country, and let us discuss this very important matter in a very objective and mature manner. Thank you very much, my dear friends.
Thank you, Minister Blackmore. At this time, normally a lecture in college will take 75 minutes. I'll do this one in 9. What we are trying to do is to give you a perspective, not ours, so please don't kill the messenger. All I'm doing, there's been a ton of research done in the last 50 years on cannabis all over the world. We haven't done any here, but others have done it for us, and I will just run you through what we believe is the perspective for a young nation considering uses of cannabis. The debate on the subject continues, and it poses more questions than answers for a small country like ours. This is not me, this is Professor Greenspoon from Harvard, and he asked, we should probably figure out at this point, is it safe? Should it be legal? Should it be decriminalized? Has its effectiveness been scientifically proven? What conditions is it useful for? Is it addictive? How do we keep it out of the hands of teenagers? Is it the wonder drug that people claim? It is. Is medical marijuana just a play to legalize marijuana? These are questions. I presented this just to give a perspective to you on how controversial and emotional the discussion on marijuana is. The government of Dominica takes credit. They have taken a proactive decision to bring the discussion on marijuana to the public for national input. I think that it's critical for a decision, national decision like this, that people have the opportunity to contribute and discuss and talk about the effect of cannabis or the legalization of cannabis in our country. This event also marks government initiative to develop a policy in the future which is informed, scientific, legal, and socially acceptable for the use of cannabis in Dominica. So at this point, what do we know? We know a lot. We know that CDB, cannabidiol, is one of the extracts found in marijuana which has proven to have many therapeutic relief for pain in patients, mainly chronic pain. THC is a chemical that causes the high to individuals and have been associated with memory impairment and addictions. Those things we know. We also know the use of marijuana is still illegal in most countries around the globe. It is still illegal in Dominica. It is illegal in 191 out of 193 nations that comprises the international community. In fact, in 20 countries around the world, one can be punished by execution for selling marijuana. It is described as a gateway drug and has been associated with memory loss. But we also know that marijuana has therapeutic value. The most common use of medical marijuana is pain control. Marijuana, however, is not strong enough for severe pain. It is very effective for chronic pain and can replace NSAIDs such as Advil or Aleve or aspirin. It is a fantastic muscle relaxant, and it's used to manage nausea, weight loss, and treat glaucoma. These are only a few of some of the properties of medical marijuana. There are 100 more uses of medical marijuana, so obviously it has value. Now, what are the challenges inherent for a small nation like Dominica in considering policy on marijuana? Every sovereign state has to develop its own policy on the use of cannabis. The new dynamic brought about by the Uruguay and Canada, for those who do not know, Uruguay and Canada are the only countries in the world that have legalized marijuana. Those decisions will impact the use of marijuana globally, including Dominica. So that helps Dominica to understand what's happening around the globe. But in developing a rational, scientific, and relevant policy, the people of Dominica need to be aware of the following. Where is the market for marijuana? If a ship leaves Dominica with a ton of marijuana heading out to wherever they're going to sell it, as soon as it gets in the ocean, it can be arrested, because everyone around us, it is illegal. So these are things that you have to consider. With a national police force of 500, where's the manpower to police the production, sale, and use of marijuana? You have to think about this. Marijuana is still a gateway drug, it is still addictive, and it still affects user memory. But that is for individuals. Individuals, we believe, can choose to smoke all the marijuana they choose, but as a national policy, government has to deal with the welfare and safety of the entire population. So, I said I would be short. We need to end with a promise to do our own homework as a nation. And what is that homework? We need to continue discussion. This is the first consultation. There will be many more. You'll have many experts from all the walks of life in Dominica who want to present to the nation. We have presented data and information and will continue to do that. Professor Antoine will give you some more from the international community. All of the research that you read and you quote are from international community. What about Dominica's own research on marijuana? Is it top grade? Is it high in CDB or THC? We don't know. We need to conclusively determine the answer to all of the above questions as we contemplate a national policy for marijuana use in Dominica. So what are the solutions? Marijuana has value. Marijuana has problems. It can help patients. It can destroy youth. Some in CARICOM has called for responsible socio-legal policy in marijuana. That is where I think, and that's where we would all like to be. But this consultation is the first step. So if we can come up with a policy that they call socio-legal policy in marijuana by 2020, we'll be fine. But before we as a nation develop this responsible socio-legal policy in marijuana, we need to be very careful and find conclusive answers to the very same questions which I started, which was not asked by me, so Charlie, don't pick on me, that's not me. That is people from Harvard. Is it safe? Is it legal? Should it be decriminalized? Has its effectiveness been proven? What condition is it useful for? Where are the markets to which we will sell our marijuana? Thank you for participating. Thank you for listening. So I'm trying to hurry this up so you can have your chance to speak. So at this point, let me introduce the keynote important person at this table. Professor Rosemary Bell Antoine. She's the Dean of the Faculty of Law, the University of West Indies, St. Augustine. She's an attorney, award-winning scholar, and activist who holds the chair as Professor of Labor Law and Offshore Financial Law. She holds a doctorate in law from the Oxford University, an LLM from Cambridge, the LLB from the University of West Indies, and certificates in international human rights from the IIHR in Strasbourg. She has served as president of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, OAS, Washington, D.C. She has been rapporteur for persons of African descent, rapporteur for indigenous peoples, and head of OAS Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights Units. She was CARICOM chair on HIV migration and is currently chair of the CARICOM Regional Commission on Marijuana. She's president of the Family Planning Association and a member of the Trinidad and Tobago National Task Force on Labor Law Reform. She's an honorary fellow of the International Society for Trust Practitioners, the only Caribbean person, and a Cambridge fellow, and was formerly employed at the ILO Geneva. She's a sought-after legal consultant to all the governments of the Caribbean. Other governments such as the UK, Venezuela, USA, Canada, the judiciary and international organizations including EU, OAS, World Bank, CDB, CARICOM, UNDP, OAS, UNICEF, ILO, UNIFEM, CAREC, PANCAP, UNAID, UNDCP. Drafting legislation, chairing national and regional task forces, authorizing influential policy. Reports on several varied issues, thereby contributing an important share to regional development. These include, to name a few, drug control, human rights, freedom of movement, anti-discrimination, health financial law, public service, police, international trust, juvenile justice, and labor law. Professor Antoine has been described as a change agent in HIV law and offshore international financial law, and the foremost labor law scholar in the region. As a team leader, the UK Law Reform Project in TCL, she was credited as returning the territory to constitutional propriety after her team drafted 48 pieces of legislation. She has published 12 books and numerous scholarly articles, with her work being described by international reviewers as original, insightful, and amazing. She has the distinction of winning the Regional Vice Chancellor's Award of Excellence twice, in 2006 for research and in 2014 for public service, and has been honored by the UWI in both its 60th and 70th anniversary awards as an outstanding alumnus. Professor Antoine also provides technical support for numerous NGOs in the region and instituted an international human rights clinic at the UWI and believes firmly that human rights must be central to development. These are the credentials of Professor Antoine, and I give to you, well credentialed to talk to you. Here she is.
Thank you. I will adopt the protocol before me. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be back in Dominica, one of my favorite places on the planet. And I've been here many, many times. Some of you know me already, including doing my in-service training here many years ago when I was young. So, yeah, right. So, you heard a little bit about the commission. Just to say that we've just come out of a 2-year exercise, 2.5-year exercise, doing extensive research, reviewing all the laws in the region on cannabis, marijuana, and I will say marijuana for convenience, because that's what the CARICOM called the commission, but I note that it's quite it's a derogatory term originally. Yes, so and that is stated in the report. But the commission is in fact called the Marijuana Commission. So that the team, there were 10 of us, a multidisciplinary team. We had with us doctors, we had scientists who've been researching on marijuana for a long time. We had members of the church. We had a youth representative who was from St. Vincent, actually, with a PhD himself. We had social scientists. We started off with 2 law professionals, but unfortunately, one person, we lost one person, so he died during the time, so it was left with just me as the law person. So this was extensive work that we did, but I think the most important thing, certainly for me, was the consultations that we did throughout the regions, with the public consultations, as well as speaking to special interest groups. So we normally do 2 types, a sort of a closed one, and then the more open one. And we started off, or certainly I did, and we were meant to be neutral as we did the work, and we were very careful to be. I myself, probably I would say that I was sitting on the fence. I'm a legal scientist, so I was looking at the pros and cons like what we're hearing. But I want to say up front that now that the work has been finished and we've prepared the report and sent it off to the CARICOM heads of government, I want to say emphatically that I am not sitting on the fence anymore. And after reviewing all of the evidence, looking at all of the laws, listening to people in the region, I am personally committed and quite clear in my mind that the law needs to change in terms of cannabis law. So it may well be that we can argue about in what ways the law will change, and in fact, the report gives more than one avenue. And as you heard about decriminalization, legalization, we gave different paths to change. I personally feel it should be legalization, and there are concrete reasons for saying that, which I will explain. Oh, wow. I can say I'm very popular in certain quarters, but there are actually logical reasons for it. Not just the social justice issues, but also the financial issues, as I will explain later. But there's also the path of decriminalization. For those of you who don't know, it would mean that the law, it will still be an offense, but it will not be a criminal offense. So there's that possibility as well. And I would want to report that the vast majority of people in the Commonwealth Caribbean also believe that the law is unjust and needs to change. That was a clear message in our public consultations. It's also the message we got from polls that we did. We sort of piggybacked on some of Peter Wickham's polls because he's been polling. He's a social scientist from Barbados. He did polls in several countries. But also we did our own questionnaires, and we had online questionnaires. They probably not as much response as we would like, but again, the message was quite clear. So there is, I would say without any doubt, overwhelming support for law reform, moving away from what we call prohibition, meaning it's totally outlawed by the law, you become a criminalization because of it. So that at least is where Caribbean people are. Some people are thinking just decriminalization, others think, as I said, go the whole way, but that is what most people in the region think. It's also important to note how many very prominent persons in the region have come out in support of change, chief justices, magistrates, church leaders, judges, social workers, educators, doctors, DPPs, members of parliament, senior members of the bar. These are all voices across the region that we've harnessed, and many of them have to do with social justice issues, others, of course, to do with economics, some to do with the medical marijuana, which is the buzz these days. Some stats in Barbados, in a very short space of time, public opinion for those who want law reform grew to over 63% in 2017, and I believe it's higher now, from below 30% just 3 years before. In Grenada, it was 61% in 2018 and 62% in Antigua, and that was the pattern in the 60s. It's actually reached to the 90s in Jamaica since they changed their law. Yes, because they changed their law, and those who were like didn't quite agree, now 90% of Jamaicans think yes, they needed to have law change. And for me, one of the most stirring images I had in all of these consultations was in Barbados, a group of persons with disabilities in wheelchairs. Many of them were women, but they were mainly elderly persons who came to the public consultation, which was a huge consultation, and they begged us, please, please, change the law so they can get access to medical marijuana. It was very poignant. But apart from the medical marijuana issue, and I have a little question mark with the medical marijuana because I see in St. Vincent that's the road they're taking. I don't agree with that road. I think that's too limited an approach. It's a step, yes, but I feel that in terms of change, most people what they think, and this is what I also believe, the laws are ineffective, they're discriminatory and unjust, they violate rights, and I think they lack legitimacy. And also, our research leads us to believe, and this is also what a lot of people think, although we did an economic analysis as well in the report. We hired an economist because we didn't have an economist on the team. And many people feel that we are also depriving ourselves of important economic opportunities in the cannabis industry. But it's not just an industry, it's also about medical research. And I don't know if you know that the University of the West Indies was one of the pioneers in medical marijuana in the 60s. We developed Cannabis for the eyes, and there have been others for one of our scientists at Mona. But of course, if it's illegal, you can't really do the research properly. So that's also an industry. And most people believe that it's denying medical opportunities, but also denying them access to medicine that can heal them more effectively and also more cheaply than traditional pharmaceuticals. And we all know about the big pharmaceutical companies. And the whole question of whether this is good law, and for me this was the central question as a lawyer, as a jurist, that was the central question. Is it good law? Because when we sit down to make law, law should have a proper purpose when we make law. It should be to correct some wrong in society. And if law doesn't have a true purpose, or if the laws themselves produce wrongs, then they offend the rule of law. So good law requires really a rational basis so that they can have legitimacy to correct a real harm or correct real mischief. And many of us can think of examples of bad laws, the Nazi laws, the slave laws, etc. These were all laws, but they lacked legitimacy over time. And what's important about these laws on cannabis, marijuana, is that they are very recent in this region and in the world, but especially here, because we've had a long history of using the herb. It came from, I have met people who remember their grandparents using, Indian grandparents, say Trinidad and so on, going into the fields and using it, because of course it came from India, Africa, these faraway countries was brought here. And for many years, I won't even say ancestors, because it's fairly recent, in 1930s, that most of these laws came in. Before then, it was just like another plant. There was no problem, So what was the reason that it became unlawful or illegal? That I think was important, especially because it became criminalized. So it's not just unlawful, but criminalized. So for most of our history, it wasn't, but then it was criminalized, although the substance had very deep historical, cultural, and of course, our Rastafarian brothers and sisters here, deep religious significance over time. And one of the things, and I'm sure we're going to get some quotations from the Bible, from the Rastafarian community, because we got that a lot, citing the Bible and so on as to the Genesis, but there's no doubt, the research is quite clear that it does go back many, many centuries. They've even found tombs with, it's not a myth, it's actually true. A lot of research has been done on the long-standing nature of it. And one of the things that we have also in our research accepted as truth is that the move towards criminalization of marijuana was really somewhat cynical. It coincided with the development or the attempt to develop the alcohol and tobacco industries. And in fact, again, this is well documented. In fact, before then, persons were being encouraged to plant the substance. It's a bit of a scandal, actually. If you read the Schaefer report, the Schaefer Commission's report from the US, in the time of Nixon, Nixon was asking, they wanted to actually increase the penalties for marijuana, and this Schaefer did a commission, which we only recently were able to read because of the transparency laws, data protection came, and their recommendation was to remove the criminalization from cannabis, and they felt marijuana presented little harm and could not justify the intrusion by the criminal law into private behavior, unquote. This was a 1972 report to the US Congress. But it's only in 2002 that the documents were declassified. So we have seen, so there has been a concerted effort to keep marijuana as criminalized, and there's a lot of evidence that it is because once prohibition was removed from alcohol, because you do know at one time alcohol was illegal, and the same sort of Al Capone type of thing, it was, the criminals and so on. It was a move to push, so that I think we have to accept as part of the context of the criminalization, which led to international treaties, and is this push to have this internalization of marijuana as a criminal substance. But what is interesting from a jurist and how it ties in with the medical and scientific evidence is that it was classified and is still classified under our laws and international treaty as a dangerous drug, which means without any value, medicinal or otherwise. So you classify that, those are the drugs like cocaine is classified in exactly the same way as cocaine, which is not a natural plant, as you know. And the reason is because it is supposed to be, well, no value to anyone. And I think today, having unearthed and now having the opportunity to have so much scientific evidence, medical, that we can no longer ignore. We can no longer ignore the evidence. At the very least, we can say that this classification is incongruous. It's wrong. It's just not true. That cannabis is a substance without any value, medicinal or otherwise. So that is the first premise upon which the law needs to be changed, because it does not correctly describe the nature of the substance. It's what we call a legal fiction, if you like, and especially because it is premised on the notion that there's harm, that it gives harm, and that we now know is also not, it is not completely harmless, as we will see, but it is not true to classify it as harmful in the sense that this was done. So we have to understand the history and the consequences that flow from that history. So we're into a new frontier, and at the very least, criminalizing persons as we do under the laws, and this was unanimous in the commission, was a unanimous vote that nobody should be criminalized for marijuana. It was not unanimous. The minority of persons on the commission, and it's transparent, we want to have a transparent process. There was a minority of persons who felt we probably should not go the whole way of full legalization as yet, because they weren't sure whether we could handle it. But the majority did feel legalization, but certainly it was unanimous that it should not be criminalized. That was certainly unanimous. And today, the new frontier, we see it as an issue, as a health issue, yes, Minister, certainly an issue of public health, and more importantly, as a human rights issue. So the question of human rights and just. So we frame it in that context. And as I said, issues of social injustice. So this groundswell of support and enthusiasm from law reform, it was very important to us that people wanted change. But for us, it was not sufficient. It was necessary, but not sufficient. Everybody said, change the law. We were there to interrogate. So we went into the hardcore science. So we had, as I said, we had scientists on the team and so on. And so we looked at all of the up-to-date, well, I shouldn't say all, it's not possible to look at all, but we looked at the most up-to-date scientific, medical, legal, and social data to see whether this is a good conclusion to make. And the evidence does support public opinion, and it also demonstrates that the existing regime, which is a prohibitionist regime, induces more harm than any possible adverse consequences of cannabis itself. Yeah? So it is causing more harm to society in a whole number of very important ways. But in any event, the horse has already bolted, because Caribbean peoples are already accessing marijuana, not just recreational use, but for medicinal purposes, and some of them describe themselves as medical refugees. That was their term. They are leaving the Caribbean. People are leaving the Caribbean, going up to Canada, going up to the States, where, as you know, you can have it without being thrown into jail, and using it for their purposes, etc. So that horse has bolted. As I said, I don't think medical marijuana is the only direction, because it ignores the social justice and human rights issues. If we only go down that road, it's not sufficient in my view. So that this information that we gathered, the comprehensive information, we feel that the legal regime, which is characterized by prohibition, that's the regime we have, is draconian criminal penalties, and I'll give you some examples in a minute. It's ineffective, it's obsolete, and deeply unjust. And the adverse consequences, and we have to accept that there can be, like with any psychoactive substance, alcohol is a psychoactive substance as well, there can be adverse consequences because it's going into your body and so on. So there's a potential for negative health consequences. But the evidence shows clearly the health risks, the adverse consequences are concentrated in what is described as high-risk persons, and first among them are the youth. And I know my Rastafarian brothers and sisters don't fully accept this. Some do, some don't. And they say it, but we stand by the finding that young people should not use cannabis marijuana because their brains are not yet fully formed. That's in medical. So that just as young people should not use alcohol or smoke or coffee. When I was growing up, my parents said, don't drink coffee, your head will get hard. It's as simple as that. But there's a lot of evidence that because young persons, children, their brains not fully formed, it can have adverse consequences. And that is a finding that we make in the report. And then the others of the high-risk persons, there are some people who react just as some people can't drink alcohol. I know some people, I had a best friend, if she took one sip, she would start going into screaming and crying. There are people like that. But to the average person, it does not present the risk that we have been led to believe, the bogeyman. Lots of things have been blamed on cannabis marijuana, and the research is showing that many of them are myths. They are myths. And some of the myths that we can explore, because people ask a lot of questions and there are a lot of assumptions in terms of the consequences, the adverse consequences. We now have, of course, hardcore evidence as to the medical benefits, but we were very conservative in the report because what we did was to classify the medical findings into conclusive. Some things are conclusive, like the use of cannabis for pain, and incidentally, very hard pain too, like for cancer, that's if you preferred, there's no question. Very conclusive. There are some that are gray areas or almost conclusive, like say epilepsy. I'm sure you saw Charlotte's Web. So we didn't put it as conclusive, but we put it as close. And there are those that there's not enough evidence. So there are three categories, because right now, of course, everything under the sun, we say marijuana. So those we did not, so we looked at it from that. But even with a conservative approach, there's enough evidence that cannabis is indeed a wonder herb, if you want to call it that, or something with a lot of medical properties. And the scientific evidence in terms of these myths has disproved, or at least severely challenges, and here are my very careful words, some of the most popularly held beliefs and perceptions of harm that currently underpin the law. The law makes these assumptions, and the gateway theory that I heard you refer to, that's a myth. And again, it was long felt that if you use marijuana and then you graduate to cocaine and so forth, there's been a lot of studies done in it. It's not true. In fact, marijuana is not addictive, it's much less addictive. I know it sounds incredible, like you, I grew up being told these things, but that's what the scientific evidence is showing. It's much less addictive, well, certainly less addictive than tobacco and alcohol and these things for sure, all right? So that, no. And you know, I suppose if people want to take drugs, will take drugs anyhow. That probably is the reason. The big one for us, you know, we spent a lot of time interrogating this question of psychosis, that it makes people go mad. That was a big one because we had people come in the audience, very small amount of people, but usually like a nurse, somebody working in the health sector who would say to us, they have seen, or somebody who lived among their neighbor, they saw their neighbor and they went mad and so forth. So the link between cannabis and psychosis is real. There's a link. The problem is, it's not proven to be causative. In other words, there's no evidence, and in fact the evidence suggests the opposite. That is, because you smoked marijuana, you end up mad. the evidence is suggesting, and with this I'm also using the latest studies done by my my deputy chair, Professor Abel, who's a psychiatrist from Jamaica, a professor at the University of the West Indies. His whole life is dedicated, well, maybe not his whole life, but most of his work is on cannabis and mental health. He's a psychiatrist. And so once Jamaica in 2015 changed the law to decriminalize, he has been trying to test some of the things that we keep hearing, you know, you smoke and you go mad kind of thing. And he has seen, and he just brought out just this year, in fact, just a few weeks before we gave the report, the evidence of his latest study, which shows no increase at all since they have decriminalized in Jamaica. And he interrogated a lot of this. And it is a lot of the latest evidence is showing that as well, that it's not that it causes, but some of the explanations have to do with the fact that people who are susceptible to mental health issues self-medicate. They self-medicate because cannabis is also proven to be a substance that calms you, puts you in a calm state, which is actually contrary to the another myth that you use cannabis and you go and you become a criminal, which some people believed. Some people probably still believe. I was at a judicial conference and I was asked that question. The police told us, and if you read the report, and the evidence, again, it does the opposite. And the scientific evidence says, you drink alcohol, you get aggressive. It causes aggression. You take cannabis, you chill. Well, I've actually never smoked. I'm waiting until it's legalized, I'll try to see. But from what I can tell, but that's what, I'm more interested in using it for my back pain because I have a spinal. But I think you're not supposed to smoke it. You're supposed to drink a tea, so I'll wait. But all of the people who understand, and some people may speak here today, people who use it, because they were very open consultations, people stood up and said to us, listen, I was an aggressive fellow, and I would have to take it to calm myself down. People told us that in the testimonies. And the police, very interestingly, the police told us that that was their observation, because we had questionnaires for the police as well. I forgot to say we had a deputy police commissioner from Jamaica and the commissioner as well. He was very strongly in favor of legalization, by the way, you know, and a lot of the police actually are. They feel that, you know, but they said to us, it does not cause criminality. Their observation is that the youth, they take it to chill sort of thing, but they saw no evidence, they saw the opposite, that it causes aggressive behavior. The problem is, two problems, and that's something that Dominica would have to address, and we all have to address. One is the growing tendency to mix marijuana with alcohol. So whatever path you take, you have to be sure how you're doing it. And young people told us so themselves, by the way, because we spoke to a lot of young people and they told us frankly, yes, they did it. And also the fact that cannabis is such a complex plant. There are so many variations of it. And in fact, and then they also have synthetic versions and corrupted versions. So it may be what our grandparents smoked. They have done all kinds of things to the plant. So that is something we have to consider. And they mix it with other things like some purple kush from Mexico and things like that. But in terms of cannabis proper, it is not the evidence. And to give you, we have a nice table in the report in terms of harm. Proof that cannabis is not harmful or less harmful than alcohol and tobacco. And the table, lethality, meaning it could kill you, is measured as 50 for alcohol, 100 for cocaine, and 0 for cannabis. That's the table. And that's from the Canadian Medical Health. And similarly, in terms of, it will show you things about being addictive and so forth. But as I said, there's enough evidence that on the adolescent brain, and even on functions like driving, it could have adverse impacts. So we recommended in relation to that. But nevertheless, on the balance, we found that the proven medical benefits of cannabis marijuana in several areas outweigh the risks. So you have to say, okay, these are the risks, these are the, what is, and we felt it outweighed it, and this is consistent, and we looked at several commissions across the world, because we didn't reinvent the wheel. Lots of people have been looking at this. There have been commissions all over the world, and this was actually, we have all come to more or less the same finding, that on balance, even if you're not sure about some of the things, that on balance, it is far better to change the law. It outweighs risks. And even the UN Global Commission on Drug Policy on gas itself, the most influential, they have labeled the current legal regime redundant. So the scientific regime is supporting a public health approach, a rights approach, a non-prohibitionist approach, focusing on high users, focusing on people who really might be really susceptible, of course, the youth and so, and having control. We did not advocate a totally liberalized regime. We felt there had to be a regulated, state-regulated regime, but certainly no criminal law, trying to reduce social harms and health risks. And of course, I mentioned the declassification, because you can't say that it has no value. The other important thing, to move a little away from the medical and the scientific, is the effect of the law. There is no doubt that the laws that we introduced in the 1930s, and Jamaica was before that, at the turn of the century, the very harsh, draconian laws, have not worked. Cannabis has some of the highest use in the world. Billions of people, I think it's 183 billion, use it. Every country in the Caribbean, marijuana is being used regularly, even by young people, and you don't want that. And part of the reason young people are using it is because it's illegal, by the way. You know that, right? So it is inefficient and unfit for purpose. It doesn't do, so if you have this criminalized regime and you think you're not preventing anything. We had a big scandal in Trinidad just a few months ago, where convent girls were selling marijuana cookies. And all the young people, 183 million people in the world use cannabis, consume it. And our consultations and so on told us how wide the usage is, even among young people. So this war on drugs, it came from this concept of the war on drugs, that was the idea, which is now totally discredited. CARICOM itself in 2002 agreed to move away from the failed war on drugs approach and adopt a public health perspective, and they have not implemented it. So marijuana should come into that different approach to it. So even if you don't think it's a good thing, even if you don't think cannabis is a good thing and you think it's a bad thing, these laws not helping you in any way. It's probably encouraging more use. So it's from a pragmatic point of view, it makes no sense. It's ineffective. One fella told us he was jailed for cannabis, but in jail he had access to much more marijuana than ever before. And that's the God's truth. All right. 91%, he was getting more of it there. 91% of the youth said it was easy to get it, and so on and so on. So we know our jails are filled with people who, you're not doing anything. Also, of course, we know that persons often, and I'm sure your audience will tell you yourself, persons who are being jailed for cannabis and the jails are overflowing for people with small amounts, otherwise law-abiding citizens. That's the only thing they've done wrong. We even had 80-something-year-old lady in Guyana who was thrown in jail because she was using marijuana because of her aches and her pains. We had several of those in Trinidad, women. We put them in jail. I mean, come on, this doesn't make any sense. We're housing. There are gender dimensions where we imprison the women and then the families. There are all of these social issues. Law enforcement personnel themselves told us this is a wasteful system. It's ineffective, it's wasteful, it's too costly. They prefer if they could use their resources to fight real criminals. That's what they told us. Right. And of course, it's also, what it is also doing, having an illicit market and a black market and a criminalization is encouraging the unsafe products that I told you about, because everything is under the table. So we're actually making it more unsafe, illicit market. Also, when we looked at how the law is implemented, that for me, being a law person, was really the red flag and the elephant in the room. Because the police, we know that the law is enforced, but it is not enforced equally on an egalitarian way. The police officers themselves told us that targeting people for marijuana is an easy way to get promotion. That's what they told. And these were very frank consultations, so I'm not making this up. Yeah, and some others took the other approach. They decided they didn't like the law, and there was an unofficial policy not to arrest anybody. So you have the two extremes in the Caribbean. People going after you quite easy, and some of them could plan things on you. I didn't say that, and they didn't tell me that, but I'm telling you. But they're saying is they will go after aggressively because they get easily get promoted. Others saying, now we don't think this is right. We're not going to arrest anybody. Both are wrong from a legal policy perspective. That is not a good law. It's either not being enforced or it's being enforced in the wrong way. What makes it worse is that it's what we call strict liability. There's no discretion on the part of the judge. Very few offenses are like that. And marijuana is one of those. And there are steep mandatory penalties. In fact, in many of the countries in the Caribbean, in your own country, Dominica, if you are caught trafficking, and that's actually trafficking is only if you have a certain amount, 15 grams on you, it's not a whole lot. So even if you weren't really trafficking, as in selling, but you had it in your pocket, the presumption is, because it's strict liability, that you're a trafficker, and if you happen to be within the premises of a school, a certain amount of years, you can be jailed for life under your law. All right? Now, I don't know if anybody has ever been jailed for life, but that's what the law says. So very draconian penalties and so on, and the judges can't do anything about it because they have no discretion. But apart from that, the law is disproportionate. It's discriminatory both in how it's applied and in relation to other criminal offenses. So for example, if, as happened in Trinidad, if you kill somebody wounded with intent, you wounded them and they ended up dead, you could get a non-custodial sentence. And in one case, Francis, this is what happened. But if you were caught with 1.15 grams of marijuana, you could get 40 years in jail for a victimless crime. That cannot be a fair legal system. One, you kill somebody, and one, even if you say it harming somebody, it's yourself you're harming, but you could end up. And that was actually challenged by the courts because it was mandatory, and the judges themselves talked about the harshness of the law, but it's a travesty of any justice system, I would suggest, and it undermines the legitimacy of the law, and this is why the bulk of people in the region think this law should be changed. They don't want to obey the law. They don't accept this law. This law is not accepted fully in the region. A plant is not a criminal, one person told us. And more importantly, the law, in terms of human rights, the way the law is enforced, and everybody in this room knows this, and many people told us this, it is enforced with biases and in a discriminatory way. So if you're come from a certain kind of family, you and many people, nobody going to arrest you. If they see you in Hollywood, you're smoking, and so it's glamorized on television, it's in the nice fancy homes, nobody gets arrested. But if you're poor and you're living on the block, and in many countries, if you're black, let's face it, and I know in Belize, they talked a lot about the race issues. Well, I was coming to that. Yes. Marginalized, those who are marginalized and discriminated, they are the people being targeted for arrests, and that was over and over in every country that we visited. Everybody had, there were some very sad stories that we heard about it. So the poor, the marginalized, and yes, the Rastafarians who have been targeted by the law. The stereotyping, the prejudices, as Gypsy said, little black boy, that kind of thing, inconsistencies. And I asked the police at one time, I said, but why? Why you all would do that? He said, it's easier. to arrest. You're a police officer? Oh, yes, every time I say about the law, you shake your head, so I was wondering if you're a police officer. Yeah. So the law, they said it's easier. How are you going to go into the fancy homes? I don't know where's the fancy place in Dominica, I can't remember. But on the block, it's easy. It's easy to arrest somebody on the block, and they have no lawyer, no fancy lawyer. So that's what's happening. So it's a function of poverty, lack of opportunities, and many times that's why people use drugs in the first place. So there are broader social issues at play, and what we are doing, people who are already vulnerable, we throwing them in jail and criminalizing them. And the human rights jurisprudence has begun to recognize that. And look at this. So the first case that I mentioned, the fancy case in Trinidad, the Court of Appeal said you cannot force us because it was a mandatory penalty of 40 years. They said you cannot force this on us. It's disproportionate, it's cruel and inhumane punishment, it's excessive, unfair and offensive, and so on. They could not change the penalties, but they could make it discretionary. So the law in Trinidad, the court struck it down and said it's discretionary. Right? So that's the most they could do, but the penalties remains on the books. And in the States and in Canada, we are seeing new cases emerging which treat with cannabis in the with a right to health context, where persons grew the herb in their backyards to medicate themselves, and the courts found you could not prevent them from doing it because of their right to health. So if you grow it for your personal use, for your pain and so on, in the Allard case, human rights, your right to privacy, your right to health. And I think even if we don't change the law, our courts are probably going to follow that very soon. So that's where we are in terms of the law. The other problem, and why I said I prefer legalization apart from issues of human rights, is that if the law remains as an offense, if it remains unlawful, the proceeds of any profits, any sort of profits you make from any industry, whether it be the medical, marijuana, recreation, whatever you go, will be considered the proceeds, with money laundering, proceeds of crime. You could be blacklisted, which is what's happening before you, and also because of the international treaties are still treating it that way. So unless you sanitize the law, so that's a big, big area, we don't have time to go into it, but that's very important. And it's also the reason why we need to change the treaty. So it's not just changing domestic laws, we have to change the treaty. But as it stands, even in the United States, some of those states were having difficulty banking the money, because when you have industry, the banks couldn't accept it. Canada will have no such problem because they made it outright legal. So those are very important issues to consider in terms of the law. But of course, we can talk a bit more about that. But also things like patents, intellectual patents, and so on. These are big issues, especially if you're developing the medical marijuana field. We already have big multinationals coming into the region to sort of take the seeds. Probably we've lost that battle. And some of the things that we have pioneered, and I mentioned Professor West at Mona, who patented Cannasol and so on. But there's that big problem with the whatever arrangements you put in place, legal arrangements, has to address those other legal issues to do with finance, but also to do with trade issues, because you don't want to go back to what happened with sugar, what happened with bananas and cocoa, where we're just doing the raw products, and then some big companies come and get in all of the real profits. In St. Vincent, one of the reasons why the peoples there sort of seemed to change their mind. They didn't really change their mind. That was our first consultation. They wanted to legalize, but they were concerned that multinationals would get a profit. So they're saying it's better to keep it illegal, and we can say that is the thinking, because other than that, they may not have a space in industry, and it's also a big problem in Jamaica. Jamaica already is one of the things that we had flagged early in the day. You can't just change the law. You have to protect the small farmers, the small entrepreneurs. You have to look at your land. You have to look at your land, like in St. Vincent, and I suppose here too, you're growing it in the hills, but you don't own the land. So what happens if you legalize? Do you now have to, how do you get the land? Do you give leases? Do you become squatters? Those are all very intricate things that you have to consider if you want an egalitarian industry, systems of land tenure. Who will get the licenses for the product? Big issue in Jamaica that we were pointing to from before. But also how you project yourself in terms of trade. Don't just allow international companies can come in and take over and you get the pittance. I think you have to guard about that. The historical lessons. And these are all law questions, law, economics, trade questions. So we know about persistent poverty, the historical lessons. We don't want to repeat those things. So there needs to be among CARICOM and so on, and among governments, the state, and there are many ministers here, that has to be an important concern when you change the law, those other ways. So as I said, the way forward is public health, human rights approach. Certainly it should be decriminalized, certainly you should be able to get medical marijuana and so on. I think you need to go further. We are suggesting a regulated approach. It doesn't mean everywhere you go downtown you should be able to buy it. We do understand if you do legalize, it might be experimental. People want to go on an experiment for the first couple months and so, which is what the experience we've seen elsewhere, but then it tends to flatten itself out. We do understand you need to have adequate public health policies in place, but in conclusion, the last point is that CARICOM governments and heads, and we're glad we presented to the heads, but they have to be unified on this position. It can't just be fighting each other up because, as I said, the multinationals are waiting. Well, they're already here. They're not waiting. They're already in the region. And what's going to happen, even in terms of trying to change international treaty, the Caribbean has an authoritative voice, or can have an authoritative voice in changing because of the historical, cultural significance of cannabis in our part of the world. We can join with Canada, Uruguay, Israel, these countries who've been ahead, and really pressure to change international treaties so that we don't have this money laundering and all these other problems we have, your banks, correspondent banking and so on. That's where the heads of state should be working towards to do that kind of pressure. Not Jamaica trying to do it on its own, Dominica trying to do it on its own. It needs to have an authoritative voice and have a proper roadmap. But I think in conclusion, there are now deep rationales for law reform of the harmful, ineffective, and unjust prohibitionist legal regime that currently informs cannabis, supported by strong public opinion and credible scientific and empirical data and analysis. And I think these are the rationales that will provide legitimacy to new laws in ways that the current legal framework lacks. And what we need to do is a public health, human rights, regulated approach to this law reform, and we hope that the CARICOM heads can work together on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Antoine. I think this is a comprehensive report as much as you can get as possible. I think there was something for everybody to think about, and certainly it will help us in the process of making decisions in the future. The actual report is 132 pages, and as you saw, you have access to it online. At this time, we will take questions and contributions, and the process is very simple. There are two mics, one this side and one over here. Just go up to the mic, recognize the chair, and I will do it. We end at 5 o'clock, so you have an hour. In the process, anyone on the table can answer the question, if they have the answers. Yep. Good afternoon.
Okay. Can I? Greetings. Just as a formal thing, I adopt the protocol as established.
Fine.
Rastafari have been in Dominica manifested from, let's say, 1969, 70, 71. We are bursting with experience we would like to share with our brothers and sisters in Dominica. We also have the experience of the Dread Act in 1974, the 19th of November, which anniversary is coming up shortly. I will not say anything much here today because, as I say, we are bursting with experience we like to share, good and bad. So we applaud this first consultation, and we have been calling for a long time for dialogue on the Dread era, that between the police, the politicians, and the Rastafarians, we can, let's say, analyze or whatever the experiences we had between 1970 and onwards. We would like to have an exchange, especially between the police and the politicians and Rastafarians. So as I say, we expect to be given a voice at some later time. It is impossible for us to voice our views here. There are quite a few of us here. Each of us have our own experiences. So we look forward to a time when the committee will focus on Rastafari. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. Yep, over here. Thank you, Peter. And certainly the plan is to continue the consult. I hope we can fix our auditorium at the State College so every Wednesdays or whatever day we try, some group can present. Yes, sir.
Good evening.
When you get to the mic, could you give your name and your organization? If you have no organization, just a name.
Yes. My name is Dr. William Courtney. I've been board certified by the American Academy of Cannabinoid Medicine. I've practiced solely from 2005 to 2015 when I left Northern California to move to Dominica. When I left, I had 8,000 patients, 18,000 interviews, currently working on patent applications, basic science research. I'm very excited, obviously, about this plant. I've used the phytocannabinoids, which are the cannabinoids found in this plant, to work with children with autoimmune disorders such as rheumatoid, to work with children with glioma brain tumors, to work with people with diabetes, and then the whole range of adult conditions. The federal government has a patent, and CBD has been approved by the FDA this month. It's now available in pharmacies. So the medical is very well established. And the heads of state had called for immediate medical and in-home use, and I'd like to support that decision because I've taken children off of methotrexate who were placed on that for juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. It really is a very viable alternative to a lot of medicines that have very severe side effects, and would like to be involved. I've done continuing medical education courses for general physicians. I've also taught for people that were seeking certification as cannabinoid specialists. I've presented at the European Union, presented from Israel, Morocco, France, Germany, across Europe and all across North America. So a lot of experience, very excited about the discussion and would like to participate. I did bring a PowerPoint, but my tire lost its air on the way over, so a little bit late. I'm sorry I missed all of it, but I'll be brought up to speed, I'm sure. And at any point in the future, if there's anything I could do in the way of a presentation, I'd gladly do it. Like I said, I've been doing those for a decade, and I'm very excited about the future of this plant and its medicinal properties.
Thank you. Anyone want to address that? Dr. Daru, do you want to address it? No? No? All right. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. My name is Richard de Ravalier.
Richard?
I want to thank God today. Richard de Ravalier.
All right.
I want to thank God today. Today is a very remarkable day in Dominica. And I want to say that because in 1970, I was then a young soldier, and the Rastaman who was there, he was a young Rastaman. We were at opposite ends, and then we were at war because of this cannabis marijuana, you know. And over the years, both you and I have a wealth of experience because from the inception of marijuana in Dominica, we were there, and I'm still there. And I got to say, thank God, I can see today we can discuss this very controversial subject in a very meaningful way. I want to say thank you for the Prime Minister, the Honorable Roosevelt Skerrit, and all the officials, including you, Doctor, who took the time out to come here and help us with the officials. This lady, oh, she was so dynamic, you know what I'm saying? And all what she says there is so very true. However, I am saying this to say, with the, we focused on the physical aspects and let's say the physical aspects more so. But I want to include here particularly so the spiritual aspects of the marijuana. You did the inclusion when you mentioned the religious. But then how many spiritualists are in our midst? I cannot elaborate on that for now. But let me just make this point clear here. As the motor cars need fuel, and the trucks and trains and so on, it is also a fuel for the spirit. And I cannot go any further from there. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Good afternoon, good afternoon. I recognize the chair and thank you. I get to the protocol. You are? Yes, my name is John Elliot Charles. I'm an attorney at law and also a legislative drafter. And I want to pay compliment to Professor Antoine for the in-depth, and her team, sorry, for the in-depth research and presentation of the report. I had the pleasure of reading the report, and actually I came here to ask one question, but in the summing up, she did address it, the interplay between the national law and international law. But you did indicate that the Caribbean, CARICOM, as a body, has been very successful in changing international law. And we have concrete examples, the law of the sea, the authority bed in Jamaica UNCLOS. We also have the ship rider agreement that we have been very successful if we work uniformly in terms of it. I also want to endorse your recommendation in terms of regulating the use of cannabis, especially regulating and not just legalization. But we have a major challenge in terms of education because we should address it not as a single item, but in conformity with the use of alcohol and the use of tobacco. And we do have a lot of examples, and they have given us appropriate guidelines and examples as to the models that we can follow. So I would encourage everybody, as has been highlighted by the coordinator, to get access to the report and read it. And I would also encourage sectoral, as my colleague, Attorney Peter Allen has indicated, we need to have sectoral discussion. In general discussion, you might get lost, but sectoral representative discussion is very important. The banking persons, the implication for banking, we have to look at it. The aspect of tourism, we have to look at it. The aspect of agriculture, we have to look at it. So I want to commend you all and thank you and encourage continuous discussion on this.
Thank you.
Dr. Peters.
Good afternoon. My name is Sheldon Kazimi. I'm here in my capacity as the PRO of the Dominica Association of Industry and Commerce, and also as representation for the youth on the street. Professor Rosemary Bell Antoine, I want to thank you very much. You were a breath of fresh air in what seems to be a very stifling environment where this conversation about cannabis has been taking place in Dominica. More so because of a lot of the generational brainwashing that we have been received through propaganda, through the media and American television and all of that. As a representative for the chamber and a representative for private sector in general, we applaud the efforts of the government to have this consultation. Although the Prime Minister was kind of lackluster in his approach in terms of the support for it and its ramifications economically, we at the private sector see this thing as a solid foundation in the building blocks of our financial and economic future and freedom as an independent nation. And what I have noticed in the countries where the path towards decriminalization and legalization has gone forth before us, in Jamaica, for example, there was a champion. In Uruguay, there was a champion. In Canada, there's a champion. We need someone from the top brass within the government administration to be the champion for the movement in a positive direction towards the legalization of cannabis. I will leave here for now by just asking one question. In all my research over the years and the different consultations and meetings we have had, I know the Rastafari movement had one last year at the UE. We ourselves at the DIC also had one. I have always brought up the amendment to the Drug Act of 1988, and I don't know, there are some legal luminaries here. I just want to ask the Minister of Health, is he aware that he has the authority and the power to grant license to people, to grant a license to people for the cultivation of cannabis as we speak, and that was done since 1988, way before even Jamaica and them had the inkling of moving in that direction. I just want to ask that question and see if I get some dialogue based on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Kazimi, one thing, I'm pleased that you're happy with Professor's report, but you have to agree that this was also, Dominic as a member of CARICOM and commissioned that report, so we're going in the right direction. So, yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr.
What?
Yeah, I can.
Yes.
Yeah, just to, let me first address my good friend, Dr. Courtney. I'm sure you related that this consultation, we've had several conversations at my office as it pertains to the future of marijuana, cannabis rather. Now, as we said at the beginning, and Dr. Peters stated that this is just the first of many conversations. And I'm sure you were reassured at the beginning of this consultation that all views, all suggestions and recommendations are being taken note of. And of course, you will get an opportunity. I'm sure you have a 2-hour-long PowerPoint presentation. You will get an opportunity to present it in the future presentation. My friend from the IC, yes, I'm perfectly aware, sir. However, in the public interest, as I said, a license has to grant a license, it cannot be done in isolation without a framework policy. And as I mentioned in my earlier presentations, we have to ensure that when we grant a license, or whichever way we take, that the systems, regulatory systems are in place to control. So yes, I'm aware that the law does grant the Minister of Health the power. Okay, but I think going to just issue a license without having the legal framework in place. We also have to be prepared for the potential social ills that result if this regulatory framework fails, etc. So I'm aware, to answer your question, but as I said, now that the convention has started, okay, and the policies and the regulatory mechanism will be put in place, then I will feel most, more reassured as a minister of granting a license to any individual or group of individuals. Yep.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Dr. Almario Kazime. I stand here in my personal capacity as a soil scientist, PhD. My intervention with the report is that, first and foremost, I would like to actually thank the Commission for an extensive piece of work. Obviously, with my background in agronomy and soil science, my slant is towards one subject area which I spotted in the report, hemp cultivation and its implications as we speak immediately. Because I speak with that in the context for Dominica's reality in terms of using hemp as a transitory phase in terms of its agronomic realities and challenges. We speak of building a resilient agricultural system, and the empirical evidence in the literature and scientific literature suggests that hemp cultivation as a biofuel can stimulate a green economy. That is also imperative in terms of agrosystem restorations, which is actually at a dire need for us after the severe ravages of Hurricane Maria. So the interest in me right now is, as highlighted in the report, the immediate differentiation between hemp sativa and the cultivated medical marijuana strain, indica. So as a result, the focus on me is on how we can stimulate this green economy by actually using hemp. Because yes, the Commission has actually identified some serious social ills and challenges that, to me, I concur with to a certain degree in terms of the social fabric and construct, in terms of dealing with the misfits and the fallouts. So I have presented a draft paper to you, Professor, which is actually entitled, Why is Cannabis Off the Agricultural Diversification Agenda? And in here I've highlighted the whole issue of climate change and using the hemp as a stimulator in combating climate change, agroforest systems restoration in terms of the severity of our ecosystem services that is actually required. So hemp cultivation has to be actually prominent in the agenda of a cannabis industry. And the report does make mention of a cannabis industry because, again, the discourse was heavily centered on the implications for our medical marijuana industry. And again, the report does highlight the short change of actually going that route and actually amplifies it to a much broader social construct. And in that case, for us as an agrarian society, cannabis cultivation there is actually one of the things that we are lacking in the construct of our diversification strategy. And Mr. Minister, you may be well aware of that we can actually have some further discussion on that. Further compounded by the fact that we in Dominica have some brilliant scientists doing some remarkable work for us. We should all be aware that we have our own Dr. Rachel Emmanuel, local scientist. Dr. Rachel Emmanuel, local scientist, actually research assistant at the University of Mona, Jamaica, who has developed a strain of cannabis called Legend, who won the Gold Cup. And this Legend strain was actually an indigenous strain from Dominica from the 1970s, crossed with the indigenous strains from Jamaica. So the THC contents of all these is known, Dr. Peters. It is known by our local scientists, and it is work in progress. So this work is actually current in Jamaica right now as they start to evaluate strains developed by our own local researchers with regards to the local strains and the conservation of these local strains. Because incidentally, Dominica was a hub of the first set of what we would call bona fide strains coming out from Jamaica in the early 70s, because we remember the Federal Maple Express boats traveling ganja up and down the Caribbean. That is where we started to get our set of seeds. So yes, genetic conservation is important for us because we recognize the severe and the high strains coming out from the Caribbean region. And again, the patents associated with that could implicate that the multi-corporations could put this on us as a caveat in terms of the entry and the liberal entry into the market. So we should be very cautious of that. Again, looking at the whole issue of geographic indicators. Just like the Blue Mountain Coffee, we could have a Dominican volcanic kush, I don't know, but geographic indicators also brings with it some, yeah, because geographic indicating also brings with it some kind of economic revenue. So that is some of my preliminary observations. But in conclusion, I would like to thank the Commission for a very, very in-depth analysis and report, which is currently being understudied. And we will see in the future. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Yes, Mr. IB.
My name is Dr. Pascal. I'm an ear, nose, and throat surgeon. And I'd first like to thank the Commission for the extensive report that I have read. But my contribution this afternoon will speak to something similar to what my younger colleague in the agriculture sector spoke about, which is the research and the possibilities for research for places like Dominica with cannabis. I always remember Pierre Charles, but I won't say that. The evidence is there, the scientific evidence is there that understands why the cannabinoids from the plant cannabis are useful for the human being. And if in the Dominican context, we are now covered by an epidemic of chronic non-communicable diseases, And if you look at the evidence, I'm not sure whether, Professor, that was addressed in all of the consultations, it would be the role of raw cannabis in preventing some of the chronic non-communicable diseases that are now killing us. Because the truth of the matter is that the science also shows that in its raw form, without any processing, and by processing I include heating, the effect of the so-called demon THC has no relevance. And if it has no relevance, then all this demonization of using related to the plant for medicinal uses has no scientific basis. And in that regard, we could just imagine if we were allowed to do the research, and Dr. Peters spoke to the particularity of Dominica, and we should carve our own course, and I think this is an excellent opportunity to do that, because nowhere else in the world is anybody rarely looking at raw cannabis, just juicing the plant. Every morning get up and you juice the plant, and you use that the same way you use cabbage or anything else, to prevent, to control your appetite, to control your sleep, to control everything that you need to be well. The other issue with all of this is that we forget to mention that relating to the plant, basically the way everybody else has taught us to relate to medicine and health, which is targeted cure. But in the Dominican context, we pride ourselves on primary health care and prevention. And this could be the one opportunity we have to regain our international position as being able to deliver primary health care to our people that is affordable, available, and achievable. And so I would like this to be considered as we proceed, but the interesting thing I will say here is that it's difficult to do the research in a scientific way if the plant is illegal. So I would be voting for the total legalization of the plant in the Dominican context.
Thank you, Dr. Pascal, for your information. I learned something. Yes, Bishop.
I am Bishop Gabriel Malzer, and I am representing the Catholic Church and also the Christian Council. I must say I'm very, very impressed with the level of research that is presented by Dr. Antoine this afternoon. In fact, I certainly learned quite a bit. I think generally when we think of the whole thing of marijuana, there's a lot of taboo around it. What I'm impressed with is the fact that the presentation is scientific and it seems to have a balance. And I think it is with this we should move forward, that we have to deal with facts, we have to deal with research, we have to deal with a sense of objectivity with whatever we do. If there is to be any kind of legal framework that will be addressed towards the marijuana usage, we have to consider what exactly we're doing. From the religious field, I think that what we are concerned about is developing in our nation wholesome people, wholesome, spiritual, and people who are purposeful. And I think that, of course, even in your presentation, you certainly made reference to the negative sides and the positive sides. Whether the negative outweighs the positive, these things are to be looked at. So whatever decisions and choices that we make in proceeding forward, we have to maintain the balance, but always with the idea of developing a nation that is wholesome, spiritual, and God-fearing. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Ashworth Simon. I'm from Maho.
Ashworth Simon?
Ashworth Simon, yes, sir. I recognize the protocol as established And I want to say to the doctor that your contribution here this afternoon, to me, is like water to fish on dry land. And having said that, I just want to raise point to three things. I observe, in Dominica, since the decriminalization of marijuana, that has changed in Dominica and is affecting us. And one, I would say, paint. Marijuana oil used to be the base for paint. Once we criminalize marijuana, we start using another kind of oil. Okay? Before, you would paint your house and probably sleep in it the same day, the same night. Now you can't do that because this tent. Second thing is rope. Rope, hemp rope. Used to be, those of us we can remember when the ships used to come there, the kind of brown rope that they used to anchor the ships with, and the lighters and all these things. And even the fishermen for their nets and things, that brown rope, that has gone. Now we have a plastic. Every potman have to wear a glove. Why? Because most times, holding the rope, they unscratch them. Plastic. The other thing is sac mayule. How many of us remember sac mayule? That is what the sugar and the rice used to come in. Today, what do they come in? Plastic bags. My brothers and sisters, we have to wake up. So having said that, there's so much that can be said. Okay, and I think everybody here who has used marijuana, I smoked it for the first time at 17. So I was not a child. And me and my pal, we have a lot of things there, even the acting. No. Hey. Sorry. Not smoking it. But we have our little joke. When he was a police and I was a smoker, we had a little thing. I don't want to go into that now. Because I don't want to go into that now. Our acting Prime Minister here, he went to school in Campbell. Campbell used to call the GE of Dominica because that is where they see it started growing. But the other thing I want to talk about is the social aspect, okay, of marijuana. Because in our community, before we started really using marijuana, every dance in the community would end up in violence, big fight, okay? When guys started using marijuana, that changed. And everybody liked to come out and dance because it was cool and nice. Today, there's a different culture because of different things and different substances. And I like what you said, mixtures of a lot of things. So we don't want to go into that. So I think these three things will really touch me. And my final point is my question. How soon will we have the next? Because we know in Dominica we have our local palace, Bat Fair Paradise Show. Okay? And if you don't understand, I'll tell you. Beat the iron while it's hot. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, I also like to inform most of you of someone talked about Dr. Emmanuel at UWI Mona. We are working with him. He will be presenting later. And we have another Dominican entrepreneur from the U.S. who will present on hemp production later on in the year. So we are listening to you, and hemp is something I'm interested in also. But I think the awareness and the information, the more information we can give to you, the better off we will be. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Moderator and everyone else. My name is Randy Rodney. I represent the Dominica Association of Evangelical Churches. I too am glad for the presentation of Dr. Antoine because I believe that there is still more need for more information even aside from what you've presented. And I appreciate what you've presented very, very much. I appreciate even more your honesty. You were honest enough to say that you were once on the fence and you have moved somewhere else. And I assume that some of the information that you have presented as well is from your strong posture of where you are. I respect that. From the Evangelical Association perspective, though, there are 3 areas, and you've mentioned all 3 that we've been concerned about. And some of you will be very happy about, and some of you will not be happy about the others. From the human rights perspective, we strongly believe that from Genesis chapter 1, 28 and 29, you really cannot make a plant illegal. Because you'd be violating God's order, okay? And so that chapter 40 of the act that we refer to is in contravention to God's design in Genesis 1, 28 and 29. Dr. Antoine spoke about the genesis of the law. And that I would still love to get the flip side off as to why the law was introduced. The second aspect of our concern is the health considerations. And for us as pastors and counselors, and that's not scientific at all, one of the things that we've noticed is in our counseling practice, and just recently I discussed it for our psychiatrist in Dominica, that there are some people whom you deal with, underscore the word some, who would come with certain psychosis. And you advise them to stop the use of marijuana for some time, and they stop it, and somehow they present better. And then they start to use it, and then they go down back the same path. And from our unscientific place, we understand that just like some people get asthma and some don't, and some get the flu and some don't, then it is quite possible that some are at higher risk than others, even without the mixture of the drugs. And when I say the drugs here, I refer very, very glibly to alcohol and marijuana and whatever else. So we are concerned, very concerned, about the health considerations, and quite frankly would like to know more about this, to hear more about this. We're concerned about the use of marijuana among our youth. We've had examples where we, and personally I've lectured at some high schools, and hear the boys, 11, 12, and 13, speak about the use of ganja. And their performance at school, the academics, is just not up to par. And I'm sure there is a nexus between that for that category of people. And so we are concerned about that. And the third aspect that we're concerned about is what we are understanding in Scripture, the whole question of prohibition. And I use that very often as I present to people. If I stand here right now, even right now in this room, and I say to these educated people, if you step outside of the door, don't look right, because there's a pink lion that's going to bite you. 99% of the people will look right. Because there is something about prohibition that really causes people to dive into something just because you said to them, don't do it. Okay? So from our perspective, those are three considerations we have. I would like to suggest to Dr. Peters and the people doing this consultation that quite possibly, Professor Antoine, we get somebody who is as knowledgeable as you are, who probably is on the other side of the fence, since you sit on that particular side. And that is not to say that your information is not credible. It is just to hear somebody's conviction from the other perspective, so we as a people can really make an informed decision as to our way forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll take one more here. Turn on. Are you on?
Just to clarify everybody sitting on the fence, I think you misunderstood. I said when I started the process, but after doing the analysis and the research and the evidence, it was on that basis that I felt in good conscience I couldn't continue to sit on the fence. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. I must start by saying I applaud you for this
What's your name, sir?
This initiative.
Your name?
Yes. My name is Ronald Deja. I am a traditional healer, also a former pharmacist, and I speak in the capacity as the former chairman of the Dominica Herbal Business Association. With all humility, I speak in authority towards this plant. And my first contribution is towards my dear friend and brother, my spiritual leaders. It is good to hear the acknowledgement that the very manual that was given to mankind in the very first book of Genesis, the first chapter, verse 29, states that the herbs which seeds thereof shall be for our foods. Likewise, the fruits which seeds thereof shall be for our food. But our brother is shortcoming, because if you skip Revelation, you could go to the Psalms. Psalms 104 states that the grass on the field is for the cattle, and the herbs is for the service of man. I could go on further to expound the prophet Ezekiel. Says that the tree, the fruit of the tree shall be for our food, and the leaves shall be for our medicine. If you have skipped Genesis, you have skipped Psalms, you have skipped the prophet Ezekiel, the final book, Revelation, states very clearly that herbs is for the healing of all nations. And I give my contribution from a clinical perspective, because with my experience of over a decade of using this plant, I have seen remarkable results. And it saddened me as a trained pharmacist in my studies and my research. It is factual, it is scientifically based that each and every pharmaceutical drug have major side effects. And it states that after consuming pharmaceutical drugs from after 3 to 5 years, you will impair your kidneys, you will impair your liver, you will impair your optic nerve. So we are posed with this question: why every single non-communicable disease we are bombarded with at this present era is increasing rather than decreasing? That's the question. Why are we having more dialysis patients when we are saying we don't know where this thing comes from? But with the evidence of research, I'm telling you it's factual that we are using too much chemical drugs in an organic being. At the end of the day, the very creator who have made us all, he knows from every cell of our body, every structure of our body, every element that we need for longevity and health is placed in the plant kingdom. We know scientifically, and I speak in, from a scientific perspective, as I acknowledge my mentor, which by name is Dr. or Professor Raphael Macholam from the University of Israel, has stated that we, as human entities, we have what we call the endocannabinoid system, which can utilize the cannabinoids from the cannabis plant. I say to us, even our dear Minister of Health, without a doubt, I am certain that the levels or the increasing amputations that we have from persons using diabetic drugs for over 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, and the conclusion of the matter is amputation. I'm saying to my dear minister that cannabis oil, which I've employed, can reverse 90 to 99% of the non-communicable disease that we are suffering from. I will further on by saying, very humbly, that it is sad that we are now speaking from a scientific perspective. In my research, the American Pharmacopoeia states that this plant, which we call marijuana, we must address it for the true identity that it is. It is cannabis sativa or cannabis indica. Marijuana is the name used to tarnish the plant. And I use that as an example. If you call an individual a thief, and repeatedly you're calling him a thief, eventually he will be a thief. We must discard this name or eradicate this name marijuana, because that is the name they used to demonize the plant. And if we must acknowledge it for its true potential and properties, we need to address it in the right name. Cannabis indica or cannabis sativa. I have many points, but because of time, I'll make my final point.
Thank you.
We need to be cognizant of the fact that the very creator who have made this plant be in the center of any discussion. And I say that to address this present era. We are hearing about what we call genetically modified organisms, genetically modified foods. And we know that you have a lot of strain coming from the cannabis sativa, cannabis indica. I make this very strong statement that we have manipulated nature so much, or want of a better term, science is very excited about bettering God, bettering the creator. That's an illusion. So based on the evidence that we may say we have from one using the cannabis plant suffering from psychosis, we must acknowledge that the miseducation that we have received over decades and decades led me, even as a young boy, to experiment on the plant. And I say to you, most of the ills that a young person may experience from the cannabis plant, it is not blame on the cannabis. It is actually blame on the experimentation. For example, you may combine the cannabis plant with cocaine, and one may experience psychosis. But what? The conclusion of the matter is the plant. And this has to be clearly understood, that the cannabis plant in its natural entity, there are no side effects. It's actually food for our entity, because we are part and parcel with this plant. I thank you.
Oh, hello, Mr. Peters.
Sally, go ahead. And after that, we'll take one more person after you, and then we'll wrap up.
Greetings, everybody. Protocol established to everybody. I going to talk on the multi-corporation aspect of what is going on. Okay. Because if I do bring that about, people might go, you know, because it's a serious thing, you know. You see, as black people, as a people of race, of the melanin, you see, when we come in for programs like that, because people has watched me, they don't really know my mind. They don't know the kind of knowledge I have. You see, as academic people, when we're educating our people, we don't hide behind masks and start things on the wrong footing. We know the scientific names. We deal with the scientific names. We don't come with the Mickey Mouse marijuana thing, because it's informing the people. You understand me? We're misleading. What is going on this day here now? This day here. Now, the report of CARICOM, it's about there. We know. We know. You understand? Tell the people the truth. Legalize it is real now. Now let me talk about the economic side. The hemp aspect, the textile, the rope. It's not just medicine alone, you know. Because we're playing it for more than, I'll put it, trillions. Economics. Economics is not a joke business and laugh, you know. Donald Trump just tell all he's going to tap into it. We're taking it for a joke. I going back within Henry Kissinger and George Bush. The whole federal aspect on cannabis. The war with China. How they make that drug illegal. And put us as we have to stay poor. And many of you want us to be poor, you know. Many of our own people want to be poor. They don't want to raise their standard. They don't want to change their mindset. They want to stay ignorant. They want when somebody tell them to go, they walk. There's not no more time for those things. We have to wake up as a people. It's real. It's beneficiary to everybody. We can't play hypocrite no more. We have to take a stand, a serious stand. This is not no joke business, you know. There, you know, man want to play, they want to go, they don't want to hear things. They want to give you time and all them bullshit. We have to deal with the reality.
Charlie.
Yeah, man, I'm talking real because you mislead. As a man, you start a thing, you cannot mislead the people. You have to call the things by the right name. You're an educator, man. We have to deal real, you know. Let me talk, man. Let me talk. Because it's real thing. Time only wake up. We're in an economic crisis, you know. Time, that's my time. We are in an economic crisis. We have to deal with the...
Charlie, make your point. We have 2 more minutes, 1 more minute.
What that's going on, the system want to control.
Okay.
And the people who fought for the liberation of cannabis, all you don't want to hear the reality. It's all about control. I want the people to understand. They have to understand it's economics. We have to look at 2 aspects. The hemp aspect, the ganja aspect. If we come in with a CARICOM body, if we're going to plant the real herb in Dominica, and we're going to help the rest to ship it with the region, we're going to, no, because I know they want to specify. They want to specify, they don't want to say if it's Dominica to grow the real weed, or if it's Jamaica, I'm going to grow the real weed.
Charlie.
No, I'm talking about factual things.
Yeah,
we
1
have
more
to take
minute.
a stand, what we're going to do.
Patty, Charlie will give you your own
I'm going
lecture.
to wrap up.
Yeah.
I'm going to wrap up because all the
Thank you.
crying. The real thing is to legalize and not decriminalize. Legalize.
Thank you. Thank you, Charlie. We have taken 1 more, and then we shall. Yes. Okay, who was there? Mr. Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, you called my name already, so I need no introduction. I'm happy for the dialogue going on here now, but I have 1 or 2 concerns because I'm a person very action-oriented, and first, not to make it just a talk shop, which is quite normal in Dominica, that we need to take some actions and some remedial actions, some concrete actions, and how quickly can we take these concrete actions. I would like to suggest 2 things. Because what is happening here is that you'll hear a lot of vibes of the Rastafari, because Rastafari have been a lone voice in the wilderness. And as my brethren Rastman said, it has been 44 years. November 19th will actually make it the 44th anniversary of the Dread Act. It is even more than Dominica as a nation. So we have been long suffering We have long been victimized, been abused, been harassed, been persecuted, been brutalized, been killed for the use of the herb. And we make no bones to say openly that we do use the herb, and we are the only people who have been bold enough over these years to say that. What I'd like to say, in short, is that two suggestions. Now that the world is taking that stance on the herb, I think it is quite in order that we in Dominica take some stance. While we are talking now, the outside world is working, and they are taking advantage of the situation. And I'm fearful that we may be talking and talking and talking and not taking any actions which will redound to the benefit of us as a nation. I'd like to say that because the world is taking that stance, it is very shameful and regrettable that we still hear people are being punished in the court system, people are being fined, people are still being jailed when they have been found with the herb in their possession. And I think because the world is taking that stance, that there should be some form of amnesty, some form of, let us put a stop. While we review it, while we look at it, let us stop punishing our people who use the herbs. And we can do that almost as an immediately. It's not something that we have to go outside to talk about. I think we could take that action immediately, that we should stop punishing our people. While the world is taking that stance and we continue to punish our people, it is just shameful and regrettable. Okay. My second suggestion in closing is that I would say that because we have been that target all along, and because we have been the proponents, and because we are the ones who actually brought this to light, while the world is even reviewing it, because we were persistent in our thoughts and in our vibration towards the herb. We never ceased. So I'm saying that my caution is that I'm fearful that herbs are going to be planted, and herbs are going to be planted inorganically, and herbs are going to be planted with chemicals. And when this begins to happen, just like our foods have become contaminated, I fear that our herbs are going to become contaminated, and that then they're going to come back and say, you see what the herb is doing? Because it is definitely in that contamination, it will cause...
Hello, thank you, over here.
In that contamination, it will cause some serious side effects. And as Rastafari, we say, somebody talked about license earlier on, but I think we who have borne that persecution should be the ones to be given any right whatsoever to plant that herb in Dominica. Because I know that we're going to plant it clean, and we're going to give people clean herbs for their benefit. So that is my two suggestions today, because there's a lot which can be said.
Thank you,
but
Mr.
these
Shaw.
two things that we can take immediate action, I'd like to put that to the table and put that before our government and our people. Thank you.
All right, it is now 5 o'clock. It's 5 o'clock. It is 5 o'clock. Okay, one more. Okay, go ahead.
Good.
It's 5 o'clock.
Good afternoon.
This is not the time.
If I may,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. If I may, I would like to introduce a new dimension to the discussion, and it's relating to mitigating. Sorry, I am Talifa Loda, a research agronomist. I want to state one, looking at the mitigation, of course, towards climate change, and using, of course, resilient farming systems, using the crop to produce resilient farming systems, but more so solving food insecurity by growing nutrient-dense foods. And what I mean by that is by saying that the crop, the cannabis, the plant itself, has allelopathic effects against pests. It has allelopathic effects against weeds, which allows us, of course, to reduce the use of pesticides in farming systems, the use of herbicides in farming systems. It allows us, of course, with the use of the plant, of course, allows, of course, it increases germination rates. What it does also is that reports have said that it increases the yield, or it increases biomass in plants. So it allows us, of course, to stress on our Nature Isle brand. It allows us to stress on the resilient brand that we speak about, but most of the wellness brand. So the use of the crop in production systems will not only allow us to have what you call increase this campaign towards food safety, but also allows us to eat safer foods, to allow us, of course, to stress more on becoming a more resilient people. And I think that we should introduce the plant itself in agriculture, introduce it in our farming systems. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. The Prime Minister is ready to leave. You were there so early, you should have spoken earlier. Go ahead. You're the last man.
Okay, pleasant day to everybody. My name is Dylan Williams. I serve as Vice President of the Dominica Organic Agriculture Movement. A lot of what I wanted to say have been said today already, but just to reiterate the whole organic aspect, because I know for a fact that it will be legalized soon, and I know that when we're going into the growing aspect, most definitely we should go about it the organic way. Because as we know that the chemical industry has been an industry that has come about in the early days, and you know, moving forward, we definitely need to take into consideration the health aspect of growing our plants with chemicals. We all know that from from a lot of research, that growing our vegetables and crops chemically causes cancer. So we need to take into consideration that moving forward, especially given the fact that marijuana is used spiritually, so that we don't you know, mess with our mental aspect, that we have to go about it growing organically. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Minister, Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister will now close up. And I want to thank everyone. We have a lot of refreshments at the back, so please feel free to partake of it. And we will announce the next consultation, its location, and its presenter before the end of the year. All right, Mr. Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In closing, let me just say a big thank you to all of us who gathered here to be part of this historic movement. And historic in the sense that while the issue of marijuana has been going on through certain quarters, I believe it is the first time when our government has decided to make it an agenda item and to have an open and fearless discussion on the matter. And so I really, really want to thank all of you for coming and for raising some very serious issues in regard to the name of the plant and all the other aspects that we discussed here this evening. I'll say to you that all the questions and all the comments that came out here have been recorded, and I believe that the committee that has been established to deal with the subject matter will review and analyze all the comments and will plan the way forward for further discussion. Now, you will agree that based on the discussion, there is much more that needs to be said, much more that needs to be explored. Many more sectors have to be involved in that discussion. It's going to call for a lot of education moving forward, both formal and informal, on the nature of the drug, the use of the drug, and of the herb. I'm sorry, all respects to the Rastafari community. I'm sorry. The herb and all the positives that can come out of the proper use of the herb. I want to thank Dr. Antoine for her presentation. She was not representing her personal views to a large extent, but the views that were collected as she went around the Caribbean region picking up information. And so her views were very objective, and I think we should treat it as such. We may agree, we may not agree, but we have to treat it as an objective thought, and we will have enough time to inject our own views into the matter. But our CARICOM countries have to be commended for their own efforts in taking a regional approach towards the issue of marijuana, of which Dominica is part of. And as has been pointed out, it's not a movement where we can move in isolation with ourselves. We need to consider what is happening to our neighboring brothers and sisters, because whatever we do here, we do not want to be locked into one little island surrounded by sea, and we cannot take the message outside. And so we have to proceed with this joint approach. There are certain aspects of it that we can lead because of our unique nature as a nature island, our unique soil type, our geography. There are certain leads we can take, but we have to be mindful of how fast we run ahead and leave our neighbors behind, and we might have to step back because we cannot do it alone. So these discussions will continue. I want to say to Dr. Peters, the chairman, that he should move with haste and with speed so we can bring conclusion to the debate. The debate will continue, but we have to bring conclusion to the debate, at the end of which we'll come up with a position that I hope that we all will be happy and satisfied with. So let me thank you on behalf of the government, on behalf of CARICOM, for being part of the regional movement on marijuana or sativa. I want to say the right name. Cannabis, let's try to use the right name henceforth. And so in very quick time, we can come up with a position that Dominica will be articulate, but it has to do with a lot with education, more discussion, because when we go and we want to go as a country, we want to ensure that we all are happy as a Dominica, and all the sectors are in fact satisfied with the position that we'll eventually take on the matter. So thank you very much, and may God continue to bless us all.
Thank you, and now we'll end by having the Permanent Secretary in Health give a vote of thanks to you, and thank you for coming, all of you.
Honorable Reginald Ostry, Deputy Prime Minister, Your Lordship, the Most Reverend Gabriel Maze, Bishop of Roseau, Honorable Rayburn Blackmore, Minister for Justice, Immigration and National Security, Honorable Dr. Kenneth Daru, Minister for Health and Social Services, other honorable members of Cabinet, Honorable Lennox Linton, Leader of the Parliamentary Opposition, other honorable members of Parliament, Your Worship, Mayor Irene John, His Excellency Steve Farrell, Ambassador and Secretary to the Cabinet, Ms. Joanne Commodore, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Justice, Immigration and National Security, other permanent secretaries, Professor Rosemary Bell Antoine, Dean of Law, University of the West Indies, President of the Dominica State College and National Coordinator for the Consultation on Cannabis, Dr. Donald Peters, Father Charles Martin, distinguished guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Ministry of Justice, Immigration and National Security, and the Ministry of Health and Social Services, and by extension the government of the Commonwealth of Dominica, I express thanks and appreciation to each and every one of you for your presence here and for your participation in the first national consultation on cannabis. And you realize we did not use marijuana, we used cannabis. To the Honorable Prime Minister, I say thank you for his leadership role in initiating this long-awaited consultation. This is indicative of your commitment to ensuring that a matter of such high interest is not sidelined, but is brought to the forefront. as well as ensuring that the views, suggestions, and concerns of the public is given due consideration at decision-making level. To the Honorable Reginald Austri, Deputy Prime Minister, we thank you for your closing remarks. You almost summarized the discussion and the way forward, and we also thank you for your attendance here. To Honorable Ministers Rayburn Blackmore, Minister of Justice, Immigration and National Security, and Dr. Kenneth Daru, Minister for Health and Social Services, we say thank you for delivering remarks respectively. The message that you both gave will resonate in the minds of those present here and those listening via media. Thanks to the other ministers of cabinet and the leader of opposition for your attendance. The Commonwealth of Dominica, due to unforeseen circumstances, was unable to conduct its national consultations, which was previously organized at CARICOM level. And so we are very happy that Professor Rosemary Bell Antoine, Dean of Law of the University of the West Indies and Chair of the CARICOM Regional Commission on Marijuana, has just joined us and delivered such an excellent presentation. For this, we say thank you. With God, all things are possible. And to Father Charles Martin, we say thank you for offering prayers over the proceedings. There would be chaos and confusion without a chairperson, and so we extend thanks to Dr. Donald Peters for your role as chairperson. Thank you to P.S. Commodore for delivering the welcome remarks and for the great contribution in organizing this consultation. To the committee assigned by the Honorable Prime Minister to organize and coordinate the first national consultation on cannabis, your hard work, dedication, and foresight is quite evident. Thank you for your services thus far. And mark that I said thus far because we have a lot more to be done in terms of those consultations. Thanks to the staff of the Ministry of Justice, Immigration and National Security, and the Ministry of Health and Social Services for your commitment and unwavering support. Without your support, this activity would not have been a success. To the many other persons, both from the public and private sector who work behind the scenes, we say thank you. To you, our invited guests, stakeholders, members of the public present here, and those listening on the airwaves, we express our thanks and gratitude. Your participation and contribution is very vital to us in decision-making. Thanks to the media for whatever coverage you provided. You ensured that we were able to reach all communities across the island as well as those overseas. May God bless all of you, and we look forward to your continued support and participation in the future. Thanks once again. God bless you all.
Finally the herbs come around. Me I quit when me a look for me get it by the pound, yeah. Sweet sensei.